All right, ma'am, and we are live. Hello, everyone. I'm Sourabhi Dutta Roy, and I'm currently pursuing my master's in English from Loreto College, Kolkata. I would like to welcome you all to the stories of tribal identity and culture that will explore the role of tribal history and tribal representation in history in shaping cultural identity and ideology, curated under TMYS's review Summer 2023 in collaboration with the Center for Asia Pacific Initiatives, University of Victoria. We are also calling for submissions of essays, poems, and short stories under the project. To know more about our submission guidelines and project architecture, please visit www.tellmeastory.biz. The topic for today is the worldview of the Great Andamanese, endangered languages, and feminist narratives under the sub-theme The Ever-Changing Status of Women in Tribal Communities. This evening, I consider myself extremely privileged to be in the company of our esteemed panelist, Professor Anvita Abbi, who will shortly share her views and insights with us. Before we open the discussion, I would then like to briefly introduce her to our audience. Renowned for her research on lesser known languages extending from the Himalayas to the Andaman and Nicobar Islands, and an advisor to the UNESCO on language issues, Padma Shri Professor Anvita Abbi is an eminent linguist and social scientist who taught linguistics at the Jawaharlal Nehru University for 38 years and trained students to research on marginalized languages. Professor Abbi identified the sixth language family of India, viz. The Great Andamanese 2003, and has bagged several national and international awards since then. We are delighted to have you on board, ma'am. Thank you
Thank
for
you.
joining us this evening.
Thank you. My privilege to be connected to you.
Uh, Thank you. Moving on, I would now like to request Professor Abbi to share her insights with us. Over to you, ma'am.
Okay. So, would you ask me some questions, or should I
Uh,
just go ahead and talk
no,
about?
ma'am. Would you like to share insights on the topic, the Great Andamanese and experiences, how they've been? Uh,
Yes. I mean, there is so much to talk about Great Andamanese that I can go on and on. But if you have some specific questions, you may ask me. However, let me first introduce my own introduction to them. In 2001, December, I, with my students, took a kind of a survey of languages spoken in Andaman Islands because I was told it's a mini India where several languages are spoken, but most important are the ones which are spoken by the tribes. And there were three different tribes who were accessible at that time: Great Andamanese, Jarawa, and Onge. And I came in touch with all three of them, studied their language for a while, and compared them, and realized that Great Andamanese is a class apart. And then I presented my research at Max Planck Institute of Evolutionary Anthropology in Germany in 2003, and it appeared that Great Andamanese constitutes a very separate family because, considering its structures with the other two tribal languages, Jarawa and Onge, it looked and appeared very different, and also it did not compare. There were no what we call in linguistics cognates, the similar structures or similar words across the three languages. So my journey into Great Andamanese actually started uh, then at 2003 when I presented my research, because most of the scientists who attended my lecture, who had come from all over Germany, said that it seems like a very interesting and ancient language, and since it's dying, because at that time there were, if I remember right, there were 9 or 10 speakers who were not very fluent, but at least they knew the language. The scientists thought that I should drop everything and start working on it. So I applied for a grant because going to Andaman and working on Andaman is not inexpensive. And I was fortunate enough to get a grant from School of Oriental and African Studies, University of London. And in 2005, my project started, which was a very intensive study of the Great Andamanese language. And my actually we wanted to start in 2004 December, but the tsunami came, if you remember, on 26th December. and we had to postpone our trip to the Andamans. So from 2005 to 2009, I was totally immersed, I should say, uh, in the language, with the people, with their culture, with their worldview, and got very friendly with a couple of the elders who became my main source of information. And this is how I spent a lot of time in the jungles of Strait Island where these Andamanis live. It's not easy to go there and it's not easy to live there because there are hardly any facilities. I've written about it in various of my publications, which you may access to. But that was very secondary for the considering the fact they were easily open and available to me to talk to me. And this is how it happened that I did collect a lot of material to write the grammar of the language. But more important and more fascinating work came when the entire team of mine, we were 3 4 people, my students and research assistants, but they we all collected words to make an interactive talking dictionary. And that's the dictionary which is still available in the market. And you can hear the sounds of all the words. And that was a very good experience because we were in the jungles. We could collect the names of the medicinal plants. We could take the pictures and many other information because I visited Andaman Island at different seasons. I never stayed at length, let's say for months together. Not more than 2 months I ever stayed at a time. So I saw lots various kinds of fishes. I did not know fish was a fish seasonal, uh, you know, catch. And this and enriched my dictionary. I have something more than 151 names of different fishes, and some pictures. Lots of them are in pictured entries. Similarly, we could also collect a lot of plants and also their names and their medicinal uses and so on and so forth. So, since I was living with them, going into the jungle with them, and crossing the swamps and visiting them again and again, I became very friendly to them, and they became, they started treating me like one of the members of the family. So my experience this with this tribe was very different than the other tribes that I have worked upon all my life. As you mentioned in my introduction, from the northeastern Himalayan languages, tribal speaking Himalayan languages, to the down to Toda and Kota in Nilgiris, and then the Andaman, and now I'm working on Nicobaris. So this had been a very enriching experience because I tried to document the language as much as I could because I know it was on the verge of extinction. And when linguists document, they don't leave anything out. Grammar and dictionary are not the only two methods of documentation. We try to document all the indigenous knowledge. So the anything that they know about the world is has to be documented. So I tried my best to document the names of the birds, and with the help of an ornithologist, we classified and we tried to match the names with the scientific names, and that is a very interesting bird book which is available again at Amazon. The bird classification and the names of the birds of the Great Andamanese. So this is the ornithological information was not part of my project, but once this tribe started giving us information on various kinds of birds, their habitats, I felt that I should document these also. So the and towards the end of my project, I realized that those people who did not share much about the language knew the songs of the language. So Boa Senior was a more elderly person, about in 80s at that time. She remembered some songs. So we recorded some songs, got them translated by her, but she could not translate. But after my dictionary was compiled, I translated quite a with as much accuracy as I could. And that book has been recently launched called Voices from the Lost Horizon. So there have by now I've produced 7 books. Some of the short stories have been published by the National Book Trust also. But this book, Voices from the Lost Horizon, contains 10 folk tales and something 42, 46 folk songs. And which it comes with the QR code so you can scan it and watch the video, which is a very interesting technological introduction advancement in this book. So what I'm trying to say that from language to the word power to the indigenous knowledge and to the oral tradition, we try to document everything. And during this process of documentation, I became very friends to these Andamanis, and they became very close to me. The children and the grandchildren recently visited me in Delhi, and that was very nice. And I also saw them just few weeks ago when I was in Andaman. So uh, their world is actually now not as it used to be, because the younger generation is happy to forget their language, which was very sad. And actually, they're on the threshold of uh, amalgamating with us, with a civilization like ours, as well as they do see the point that the parents and the grandparents were happier when they were residing in the jungle and when they had old ways of life. So this uh, kind of a flux, where to go or where not to go, is very prominently seen among the youth. But coming to the worldview of the great Andamanese, I came to know of the worldview through the grammar. And this is very interesting, that how a grammar emotes a community's philosophy or the way they look at life. Great Andamanese, interestingly, maybe because it's one of the oldest civilizations in the world, on the planet still living, they associate their body divisions with the world. So the world is seen through the divisions of the body, and each divisions have several body parts. So the grammar has coded these body division markers, as I say, and each marker is attached to every grammatical category that you know of. For example, nouns, verbs, adjectives, and so on and so forth. So, for example, air is a grammatical category or a body division marker which is reserved for the external body parts. So, if you are explaining somebody or some object's external features, you prefix it with air, like air big, you see, or air beautiful. Uh, but if you are describing somebody's inner quality, then there is a body division marker A, which is reserved for the internal body parts. Now, this A will be prefixed for the inner quality of anything. For example, if your chai or tea is sweet, then it is the internal quality of that object. Or if somebody is very nice, behavior wise, it's an internal quality. Then you will prefix a nice, or a, the sweet, or any salty thing, for example, is known as a sare, you know, or anything whose person who's nice is beautiful externally is air bungoi, but if somebody is nice internally, it is a bungoi. So this is how it goes. The whole world is seen through their body, and this was a very interesting worldview for me to come across, because I have worked on large number of tribal languages of India and other languages, but I never came across this kind of worldview nor this kind of language, emoting all these in their grammars.
Right, ma'am. So, like you were mentioning, that these people became family to you almost. So, I guess I'm curious that what made you like think about the Great Andamanese in the beginning. Like, why did you base your research on them at the very start?
You see, I have I had been working on tribal languages since 1976, actually, and as I moved on, from one language to another, I realized that the Indian tribal languages are not very well worked upon. Very few languages are really well known to us, and then somebody told me that there is a very ancient tribe living in the Andaman Islands who are the remnants of the first migration out of Africa 70,000 years ago. You see, and that information was like mind-boggling, and also the fact that this area was unapproachable, and when I started work on this, it was no longer a tourist spot. Now it has become a tourist spot after tsunami. But before tsunami, people, it was known as Kala Pani, as you know, Andamans. And it was a shunned kind of a place. So it was very challenging. And I love to take challenges. So I said, okay, let me try this across the mainland because it's 1500 kilometers away from Kolkata, or where you are, or from Chennai. It's in the Bay of Bengal, and these very little was also known about these islands. So that's what attracted me to the Great Andamanese. But as I told you in the beginning, I was more attracted to the languages of Andaman per se. And during my survey, I realized that the Great Andamanese is the one which is the oldest and which is on the verge of its extinction. So this is, and but it was also challenging because it's not easy to work on a language which is on its verge of extinction, because data collection is a challenge. Everything is a challenge. To be accepted in the society is a challenge. People don't want any outsiders. They have been subjugated for a long, long time. Their rights have been usurped. Their lands, they have been dislocated in very many ways. So they don't like the city people. And in such an atmosphere, to create a niche for yourself and to enter into as interior as their language, because language emotes everything: your philosophy, your way of life, your values, your judgment. So people don't want to share anything. So it was very challenging, and but I took upon myself to meet this challenge because I wanted to know more about the language. So this is why I was attracted to the Great Andamanese particularly.
Right, ma'am. Coming to the aspect of language, we often say that language is not something that is exactly constant. It is ever changing, it is ever evolving. So, what are some of the evolution or devolution, for that matter, of the endangered languages that you have come across during your extensive research in the field of linguistics?
You see, it is true that languages change all the time because of internal innovation and external forces like language contact. Now, consider, for example, English has changed drastically in the last 500 years. So much so that if I write a sentence of English which was taken from 500-year-old time, you would not be able to recognize that language. It has borrowed during its evolution from Roman French very heavily, the lexicon especially. You can, consider those words un-English. But this is evolution, you see, progress and change for better. Contact brings in change in every language, and it is only when contact or subjugation of a community that makes the heritage language redundant, huh, or unimportant, or it makes it in a way that creates the situation in a way that it falls out of use. Only then we have to be worried about that this language change is not good. And I being a linguist, I'm not very much I know that languages die, but languages also emerge. So there are new languages also which are coming up in India. But the problem is more when the structures, the grammatical structures, or let's say the linguistic structures of languages start eroding. You know, most of the northeastern languages have something called expressives. And these are the words like in Bangla, you have hurmur korche. You see, what is this hurmur or jhagchak or jhanjhan in Hindi? You see, and in northeastern languages, they have many words which emote five senses of perception. Then there are 66 different ways that they can walk. So the word for walk is yaid, but you can walk, you can do yaid in 66 different ways, and those 66 words are known as expressives, like your, uh, you know, talk talk, or like I said, jhanjan type of thing. So, these are the very rich resources, excuse me, These are very rich resources of grammar which associate a community with their cognitive abilities. These are the structures which are decaying. In fact, as of talking to you now, there are languages like Khasi, spoken in Meghalaya, which is an Austroasiatic language. In that language, younger generation has totally forgotten these expressives. And once they're forgotten, you can think of the fine tuning of the capabilities of visualizing the walks of various kinds of walks has also gone. So the language, when language structures erode, then it does adversely affect your cognitive abilities. It does adversely affect your perception or the fine tuning of perception of various things. I mean, just look at our language. We do not use proverbs and idioms as much as our grandparents and parents used to use. And with that, we have lost a lot of cultural information. With that, also, we have lost a style of speaking, which was not very direct. You see, so these body division markers that I just talked about, Great Andamanese children who try to speak their language are trying to drop this out. And once they start dropping out, and well, now the language is almost gone. So once if someone drops out these body division markers, the whole grammar changes and whole perception of the world will change. So language change is not bad, provided the change enriches the language, you see. And it is depletion, or I should say, killing the language that we are averse to.
Right. Excellently put. In your paper on Where Have All the Speakers Gone? A social linguistic study of the Great Andamanese for VOCA, you have said that it is the singing of indigenous songs that often keeps the language alive, and that the life of songs in heritage language is longer than the language itself. Keeping to this point, also in your book Voices from the Lost Horizon, which you just mentioned, consists of a composition of number of folk tales as well as songs of the Great Andamanese. Uh, would you like to elaborate on how the oral tradition of storytelling or singing songs impacts the awareness of endangered languages, and why are such practices important in the preservation of a language?
Well, there are multiple questions here. I like to be short and tell you the specifics. To begin with, let me tell you that my experience is that songs are more robust in life than narration. So songs stay in our memory much longer than the language, because language has to do with the grammar, right? And once you lose the grammar, you do not know how to weave a sentence. So once you do not know how to weave a sentence, you will not be able to narrate or any incident or a folk tale. So that's why the folk tales die first and songs stay in the memory. You may remember some of the diasporic communities who migrated from India 200 or 300 years ago, whether when they went to Trinidad and other small islands for sugarcane trade industry and all that. They still remember their Bhojpuri songs, but they do not know the meanings of it. They do not know the words, but they do sing in various rituals, and for example, in Mundan ceremony or in marriage ceremony, and so on and so forth. So these songs have the power of staying longer. And if somebody can understand songs actually indicate your cultural values as well the kind of culture or the civilization that the community has lived by. So they are, in a way, interesting ways of giving you past history. Similarly, the tales, the folk tales or the indigenous tales, they are actually, the entire folklore is a collective cultural heritage of a community. It glorifies also the past, but at the same time it also informs you about your past. And keeping remembering the past in present always gives you some kind of an identity and a kind of a dignified life. And I feel the community feels much elated if they know their folk tales and are able to narrate, because they always think that they can connect to the past. So uh, the most of the tribal languages of India, something to the tune of, let's say, 800 of them are unwritten till today. And these languages have sustained themselves through oral tradition. There are songs and there are rituals which go on for 2 nights or 3 days, and they keep singing in honor of some deity or the other incessantly, and every community member takes part in it. So, these are the oral traditions which have been passed on intergenerationally, and that's what has sustained these languages. And that's what these are the custodians of these languages, these tribals mainly. And it is amazing that the oral tradition saves us from cultural amnesia. It also saves us from loneliness, and it connects us with our glorious past and helps us to move on in life despite all the odds. How do you think that tribes have really survived on this planet despite all the odds and all the disadvantages? And now, with the rampant dislocation that they are facing in the name of development, they have nothing to lean on, they have nothing to hold on to other than their folk tradition and the oral tradition. So it's not very unusual to see an old person or old woman singing to herself. It's all because this mode of uh, expression gives you solace. You see, uh, I certainly feel that the storytelling is an art that must be taught in schools for various reasons, from developing a sense of proper sequencing to mastery in uninhibited speech rendering. You see, I remember when I was a child, we used to we had a class of storytelling, and that really helped all of us to open up among ourselves and as well to the teacher. And I'm sure it must have also helped us in arranging our thoughts. You see, uh, I would say in a short form, that old tales, and whether folk or not, or songs of yesteryears, bring back cultural ethos, values, beliefs, and above all, gives community an identity. And that's what my experience is with the Voices from the Lost Horizon, that during my collection of folk tales, my main informant, a person called Now Junior, whom I call my guru, who taught me the language, initially he was very reluctant to tell me a story, saying, 40 साल से सुना नहीं, आपको क्या सुनाएगा? You have not heard for last 40 years, what I can tell you, had come to the conclusion that he remembered everything, and he was so excited about it that I could see that his language had revived while he was narrating me the stories. Initially, he narrated his stories in Andamanese Hindi, then he moved on to the broken Hindi, broken Andamanese, like that. And after a while, after almost like 1.5 years, I realized that he is speaking Andamanese, and his language was revived because he himself told me that after talking to you and after narrating all the stories to you, and he was initially narrating in bits and pieces, he used to go home, remember them. He realized he remembers his languages very well, and he had someone to whom he can narrate these stories. So you see, this is also a good method of reviving your language, to tell a story. So this, I think, oral tradition is a very important aspect of our daily life, which should not be shunned away, and our schools should certainly give a very prominent space to nurture our oral tradition. And it cannot be not done, because every village, every small areas in our country have elders who can come and help us in continuing their oral tradition in class. And imagine the joy and the fun that the class children will have once they have a period just on folk tales and folk songs, and narrating and listening to these. So one should continue this tradition even in the written mode, if possible, and even after your language is written down. Oral tradition doesn't become redundant. It's a very big support to the community.
Right. Ma'am, while you were talking about the evolution of language and the change of language, I guess it also comes with the recent trends of language study. And one such recent trend is the study of the feminist use of language, or the
Hmm.
gendered aspect of language, that has been taking mainstream space since quite some time now. So, for instance, in the USA, the word "her story" became really popularized to refer to history that is not just for the men. So, do you think that it is necessary for any language to be also studied with regard to the feminist ideology or narratives? And if so, then while conducting your research on linguistics, did you see any patriarchal predominance in the languages of the Great Andamanese?
No, I did not see any patriarchal predominance in the language of the Great Andamanese. Uh, Actually, we cannot associate gender category in the language with sexist angle. That's a wrong way of looking at it. You see, gender in grammar is basically a kind of a classification. There are languages which have 5 genders or 4 genders, so that doesn't mean that it has to be biologically associated to. You see, languages like Sanskrit, if you remember, or Konkani, as a matter of fact, and Khadiya, the tribal language of Jharkhand, have 3 genders: masculine, feminine, and neuter. And it appears to be very clear that, okay, there could be which is feminine, which is masculine, and so on and so forth. However, in Konkani, all the plants are neuter, but those trees which give fruits are not neuter, they are feminine. And in Sanskrit, as you know, lata, which is a creeper, is not a neuter, it is feminine. So these grammatical gender doesn't have to be associated with the biological gender, number one. Number two, the Great Andamanese does not distinguish between their words by the gender category. They have a word for boy and girl, but the grammatical gender that Hindi, Konkani, Sanskrit, all these languages have, they don't have it. In fact, the if you want to see the egalitarian society, then one has to look somewhere else. For example, Kuruk or Oraon, the language spoken in Jharkhand, in Ranchi area and the surrounding areas. This is a Dravidian tribal language. Do you know they have 2 different distinct grammars, one for women, one for men? So the noun inflection and the verb endings of women's grammar is very different than the noun inflection and the verb endings in the men's grammar. So would you call that society more egalitarian because they have now they have 2 distinct grammars uh, to communicate with? So I don't think that these categories can be taken to uh, anything seriously about the gender issue. And the as far as this American thing that you just mentioned, that um, we have the community here has coined a term like her story and history. You see, the what the changing history to her story does not give equality to women, because over the years the word history had lost the masculine angle and had acquired a specific meaning. And the meaning was of past stories or accounts, right? And in other words, what we call in grammar, the word history had been grammaticalized. It may have been coined initially by the blending of his and story, but over the years, history is no longer a story of one particular gender. It is a story of everybody, because the word has been grammaticalized. But now, when you use the word her story, it is not a grammaticalized word, and it is not a generic word like history was, right? When it only gives the specific meaning of story of a woman. So changing words like one to another, finding that how it was originated, we should change it now to a new gender identity, will give it more specificity. Yes, it will give specificity, but it will lose its genericness. So you'll have to coin another word for generic then. So I think this is a futile exercise. And if you talk about the Great Andamanese, I think they are the supreme, because there is a gender neutrality of names, as the names are given to a child when the child is in the womb. You see, so Boa could be a name for a woman, it could be a name for a man, depending upon what the person is. And in fact, the name changes 4 times in this community. according to the season and according to the passage of rights time. But then the name that was given to you at the womb stays always, and even after your death, the word prefix is used Maya, which means late. So late Boa means Maya Boa. So the name that has been given to you at the womb is absolutely gender neutral. So I think that is better equality than finding faults here and there and changing words like history to her story and so on and so on. So well, this is a feminist view of changing words into different words which emotes feminineness, but they are not looking at the names themselves, or there are so many other things which are not equal in life. And these words, as I said, are grammaticalized to a generic topic or a generic meaning which should not be robbed off them.
So you're saying that language is never gender specific.
I'm not saying they are never gender specific. I'm saying I just told you that there are
No, no,
gender
you're
specific.
saying you're not saying that you're saying that they are not gender biased. That's what I meant, sir.
Yeah, I'm saying that they are not gender bias. Yeah,
Right.
biasness is within us, and we are trying to look at them from
Yes,
different point of
absolutely.
view, and different people will look at different ways.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, we will look at based on our personal biases. So, um, anyways, language can be a very powerful tool, like we have established already. So, if not the most utmost powerful tool, uh, but there are languages that have become distinct over time or are in the process of getting distinct, and your research is, of course, all about that. So, would how would you say that these vanishing voices can be preserved in the long run by scholars or the general public alike?
You mean distinct or you mean extinct?
Extent.
Yeah, I think you mean extinct because then you're saying why, how can it be preserved, right? Well, saving a dying language is not easy, Sourabhi, because but however, there are some measures I can tell you by my experience and by looking at what is happening around the world by various linguists. See, documentation is one source of saving a language or preserving a language. See, I would say that the languages which are on the verge of dying can be preserved, but the languages which are gradually vanishing can be stopped from being vanished. And so there are different measures for different kinds of the health of the language. In linguistics, we generally have something called vitality index, and we measure the health of languages according to that vitality index. And depending upon their status, we decide what measures to take. However, documentation is one aspect which can be taken even for vibrant languages like Bangla, Hindi also. And documentation is done, luckily, with the technological advancement. Now we can do it in very many ways, but the audio and the videos and the text forms and interactive, all these three. And these can be done extensively. And I have shown that how it is to be done for the dying language like Great Andamanese. And the most important thing to have the language survived, I'm talking about survival, is by extending institutional support, which means to introduce them in schools. Now, under the new education policy 2020, I believe the mother tongue education will motivate people to write primers and books in mother tongues, and the mother tongues will be saved at least at the primary level. And once it is saved at a school level, the language will not die. So, the institutional support is very important. If not as a medium of instruction, one should teach these language as a subject. You see, even in the Western countries, children learn now two, three languages in school, whether they use it later in life or not. But it exposes them that how other languages look like, and they won't have a kind of a superiority complex about their own language if they learn about the other languages. So we can teach them as a subject in the country at various levels. so as to imbibe some respect and honor to these indigenous languages. UNESCO has declared 2022 to 2032 as the decade of indigenous languages. And under this decade, we should try to document, promote, and save these languages as much as possible, especially those where there are 100 and more speakers can certainly, thrive better if they get some support. Where there are very few speakers left, say in two digits or less than 100 or less than 200, let's say, then it perhaps may be little difficult, but nonetheless the effort should be made. The indigenous languages and the knowledge stuck in them should be made part of our educational, judicial, and political systems. I very strongly feel that all these three are very important for any languages to hold their heads high, because this introduction to educational, judicial, and political system will give them equal opportunity to express freely without any fear and inferiority complex in the society. And that's very important, you see. So there are these three ways, I think, how we can save our languages from extinction, and how can we give some honor and dignity to our indigenous languages, because Indian languages are very old, they're heritage languages, should be certainly saved.
Right. Lastly, ma'am, can you talk about the relationship between language and environment, especially in the case of the Great Andamanese, since they are perhaps the languages of the tribes that are closest to nature?
You see, there's an intimate and inextricable relationship between language and environment per se. But the Great Andamanese and these tribes, especially, have a much more intimate relationship because they live in the nature, for the nature, by the nature. According to the animist perspective, consciousness is present in all natural and supernatural phenomena, in animals, in ancestral spirits, and in geographical features such as stones, rivers, seashores, mountains. I remember the Kanchenjunga, the Lepcha tribes across the uh, national boundaries, both on Nepal side and Indian side. They look at Kanchenjunga as their parental abode, and they also look at the Kanchenjunga as the mountains that they have to go to after their death. So each peak of Kanchenjunga associated with each clan, you know, of the tribe. Similarly, uh, the Wancho tribes of Arunachal, you see, they amalgamate nature and surrounding environment with their existence, way of life, and value judgments. Their sense of kinship extends to embrace the entire natural environment, and the stories reinforce the protective role towards biodiversity that is assigned to human intervention. So the Great Andamanese also, the kind of knowledge that I got from their nature, about the seashores or the stones in the sea and the pebbles around. I mean, all these have various kinds of elements that connects them to their life, to the society, and they have various kinds of value judgments come also from that. You see, it is the study of nature, amalgamation of nature, that when tsunami came, India lost more than 7,000 people in Andaman Nicobar. But is this a miracle that not a single tribe died? Not a single calamity. And the reason was that each of the tribes, whether it was Jarawa or Onge or Great Andamanese, they had knowledge about how to recognize the nature, how to recognize the sea waves. So every community, for example, Jarvas, if you remember, the tsunami came early in the morning, and all the three tribes were fishing at that time by the seashore. So the Jarvas saw the patterns of the waves, and they knew that these patterns are very dangerous. So they ran into the forest. Whoever was fishing by the side of the sea announced to the community that they should go deep into the forest or go up a hillock to save themselves, some kind of uh, pralay, is coming or approaching. So Java saved themselves like that. Great Andamanese people told me that there was this particular person, now junior, was by the seashore with some children, and he saw those fishes which are not seen otherwise. I did not know that sea had three levels, and he introduced me that the sea had three levels. And when I compared his notes with the scientific notes, I realized he was right. So there is a top level where we generally fish, and these are the fishes that are they reach our table, dining table. But then there are fishes in the twilight zone, you see, which they never come up unless the sea turned upside down, you see. And there's the third level, which is the darkest level, where the fishes reside. They never come up. So what now was saying that he saw those unusual fishes which he had never seen, and he realized that the sea has turned upside down. There's a word for it, ukubulu. And he said the sea has turned really upside down, and so he wanted to run, but by the time he decided to run, the water has already increased a lot. So he asked the children to, there were six or seven children with him. He asked the children to go up a tree. He exactly knew which tree among all the trees surrounding him will hold the weight of six children. And he kept on swimming under the tree for 7 hours. You see, kept on guiding the children when to go up, when the water receded a bit, when to come down, when to come down when the water receded a bit, and when to go up when the water was again swelling. So his knowledge about environment was amazing. He could save the children, he could save himself, and he could visualize what is going to happen. Onges had a similar, experience. They said when they saw the water coming, the way it was coming onto the land, they again have a word in their language which means the land became water, and they knew they have to rush. So they left their huts and they rushed as deep into the forest as possible. They did not have any hillocks, but they went deep into the forest to save themselves. So you see, all these experiences tell us that the tribes have a very close association with the nature because they've lived in nature all their lives. In fact, we have to learn from them about how to save our biodiversity, preventing the destruction of biodiversity. They also know about the climate change. Now we are facing havocs these days because of forest fires. In their times when the tribes used to live in the forest fires, the natural forest fires used to take place. But the amount or the gravity that we face today was not there because we are absolutely playing havoc with our nature. Look what has happened to Joshimath. So the thing is that we unnecessarily and unmindful in our action because we don't understand the nature and it's the beauty of the biodiversity. However, tribes do, and they have retained this earth for us for so long. But now we are dislocating them from the very forest they were living. So once they are dislocated, their knowledge will also evaporate. When then there's no context, of course, the knowledge will evaporate. And the dislocation takes the heaviest toll on the language. So when they lose the language, they also lose the way of expression, and they will also lose the indigenous knowledge, like the tsunami knowledge I just told you about. And there are many, many more examples about other tribes also, what kind of knowledge they have about their survival and the survival and the nature. In fact, they don't, I'm calling these words like havoc and things like that for tsunami. They don't. They think this is part of the nature, you see. Once even the wind, the strong wind, the storms, the tsunamis, these words are in their languages do not have a negative connotation. In their languages these words have a very positive connotation because just like it's part of their life, it's part of the nature's life, that if there are spring then there has to be one day a tsunami also. So they know how to cope with each of the uh, phase of nature, like we cope with each phase of our life from childhood to old age and so on and so forth.
Right. It's amazing to listen to such stories, especially like you mentioned, for people like us from cities who are so far apart from, detached from nature. Ma'am, I said last question, but I have another question for you. Is there any paper of yours where we may know about this tribe's three level of sea thoughts and your study on that, like you mentioned?
Oh, there are several papers, but uh, there are a lot of information given on in my dictionary, which is published by Ratna Sagar, easily available in Delhi. And if you look at my website www.andamanes.net, ANDAMANESE, andamanes.net, then you will get a lot of information about those other dictionary and other books. In dictionary, it's actually, I've called it dictionary, but most of my reviewers said that why do you call it a dictionary? It's an encyclopedia. And there are a lot of encyclopedic information tucked in this, but the I have not included the tsunami information there, but it is there on several papers. I'll try to see which paper would suit your requirement. You just send me the email, and then I'll send you that paper. But I would advise your readers or onlooker viewers to access this dictionary if they can.
Right, and thank you, ma'am. That brings us to the end of today's session. Thank you once again, ma'am, for sharing your invaluable perspectives on the topic and for joining us this evening. I'm sure the audience who watch the live or who will be watching it in the future will just be equally enriched. Just a slight reminder to those who are watching, we are calling for submissions of stories, essays, and poems related to the project. To know more, please visit www.tellmeastory.biz. We'll come back to you soon again with another panel discussion. Until then, good night.
Good night.